name is Ronda Racha Penrice. I am based in the U.S. and I have been a writer for nearly 30 years now, covering primarily entertainment, but touching on my background as a historian. Now, a lot of people who are writers, they had the intention of it, or, I work with people who worked on school newspapers and so forth. None of that was a part of my journey. My family, if you know anything about the U.S., I hail from Chicago, which is a city that has a bit of notoriety these days as being like dangerous and violent. And I'm from one of those kinds of communities. So it was not necessarily a given that I would be in the profession that I am today. In addition to that, my mother was originally from a small place called Brookhaven, Mississippi, where her family had a farm. And I spent a lot of my formative years there, being educated in, small rural rural area, going back and forth between the big city and the countryside. But as I became older, what I realized is the extremes of those two worlds gave me a perspective that a lot of people did not have. Because I was a voracious reader, I just went to all kinds of worlds as a kid. I read books that took place in South Africa. I read books that were set in Georgetown, Guyana, in addition to Los Angeles, DC, and that just gave me a window into the lives of other people and how they lived and what motivated them and their different challenges. For me also, I loved television. I just could not get enough of it. So it's surprising to me that today, many years later, I do a lot of the things that I loved as a kid. I still read, I write, I watch TV, I listen to music. But getting here was a lot of luck. Some would say, destiny. I'm not certain. But when I was in college and I went to Columbia University in New York, which was a whole other experience because it was the first time for me living on my own. But as much as I love literature and history, just being a writer was not something that was feasible for me. I mean, my mother was a teacher, but and my aunt was a social worker, but for the most part, my family is a working class family. And that is, you know, what I knew. I didn't really meet people who were writers when I was young. Um, I don't know like why I didn't make the correlation that, real like living people wrote books. I mean, I knew it, but you never think it's something you can do. So coming to New York and excelling in my classes, oh, forgive me, I just realized when I was in college, I had a professor who told me that my writing was very good and that he could see me writing for like he sometimes wrote for Rolling Stone, and he could see me doing that. And I'm a little emotional because it just hit me that I found a piece for Rolling Stone last week and didn't even know that that's something that someone had put before me. But I often tell people that a lot of times we get an idea of what it is we think we should be. So for me, I was going to be a lawyer. I was very active in pre-law activities. I took classes for the LSATs and all of that great stuff. And when it came closer to doing it, I just didn't do it. And there were people around me who were like, well, Rhonda, it's okay if you take a break. It's okay if you do this. And I fell into working for Columbia and then working for MIT doing alumni relations. But while I was in these positions, particularly at MIT, I had friends that I had a friend who worked at a magazine, Marie Claire, who knew that I was passionate about Black culture and Black history. I spent my school time reading and researching and taking classes on history and English. And even when I was in classes that did not focus on my particular experience, I found ways to bring that into what I did. It meant doing extra work because a lot of times it's easier to do what's expected. So when you want to explore different things about yourself, your culture, where you come from, then you have to do a little extra work. Fortunately, we're in a time now where it's not so much extra work. But back then, it required going into the library and really digging deep. But because this was something that people knew about me, they were always looking out for um, things like, Black history. So my friend, when she was invited to exhibits that were about Black art or just lectures with authors and so forth, she would share them with me. And then, like, some people can say it's an accidental meeting, that it's a coincidence, but for some it is fate. I met this woman that I've literally only ever seen twice in my life. And at that time, I was like, I really wanted to work in the music industry. So I would go to all these different things and didn't really know how to get into that. Well, I spoke to this woman at a music conference, and somehow I talked a lot about what I did as an undergrad in African American literature. And so she had taken my address and sent me a publication called the Quarterly Black Review of Books that had just launched. And as luck would have it, where I was working at MIT was only a few blocks from there. So I wrote a letter, as I was prone to do back then, and telling them how I loved the publication and pointing out where I thought they could improve and how if they needed help, I had extra time and I could volunteer. Well, I don't know. Even though I wrote the letter, I didn't expect for them to actually respond to me. So I came in, it was a Thursday, and by that Saturday, I was helping them put the next issue out. Over the time that I spent there, 2 years, I would start doing a section called Books Worth Noting, where I would do many reviews of books by Black authors, mostly about Black people, every issue. And that was a monumental education for me. As much as I had done at Columbia, being exposed to some of the most renowned professors, to ever step into their fields of study, there was so much that I had not been exposed to. I was reading books like the great Duke Ellington had a memoir called Music is My Mistress. I would read about, there was one book, The Black Phalanx, which talked about in U.S. how Black American men had fought in every single war that was on this soil. I learned about Black art and just a lot of different things that was just invaluable. And there was my editor, Tanya Bolden, who had gone to Princeton and had majored in actually Russian. And so she took me under her wing and just encouraged and let me know that this kind of thing was possible. And I still was trying to escape because there was like the Museum of Television and Radio had opened, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I would love, to work there. And I was always looking at things outside of writing until there's a book agent who's very famous in New York, Marie Brown. I did a profile of her for a publication. And she said to me, Rhonda, concentrate on writing, and writing will take you places you never knew you wanted to go. And so I listened to her, and I'm sorry that I'm getting emotional, but I listened to her and I just concentrated on writing. Now, I ended up going to the University of Mississippi in my mother's native state, where most of my family is from, because I was always interested in the Black Southern experience. Coming from Chicago, I didn't even realize my family was Southern, because the Midwest and Black Midwesterners in particular are very like rooted to that culture. And I grew up going back and forth between the two places. So it was a natural thing. But then when I go to New York, there is not that these other cultures weren't in Chicago, they just weren't a part of my world. And so going to New York, I got a heightened sense of myself as being from a family that was rooted in the land, that was tied to this history that was far greater than anything I had imagined. I began as I met people, had friends that were from Jamaica and Haiti and from Nigeria and different places. Um, I started to notice the ways in which we were alike, how our experiences bound us, and I became fascinated by that. And I wanted to explore more of what that was for me. So I entered a program in Southern Studies and got to spend a lot of quality time with my grandparents as an adult. That really began to change who I was. Now, one of the other things I was always into, which today is very popular, but back then in the 90s was not, and that was, I was always passionate about hip hop. And so at that time, hip hop was outside the mainstream. Like people were making inroads, but it was not an area that someone like me, who had, gone to an Ivy League university and had gone to grad school, would be encouraged to go into. And as a matter of fact, at the time, even the emphasis on Black history and culture was outside of what was encouraged for people who were coming up and wanted to be serious in the world and make an impact. But I was so driven by these things that what was expected of me didn't matter as much. Unfortunately, I came from a mother who played by who was into the rules, but also very confident in what she wanted and doing, um, emphasizing what was important to her. And I picked up on that. So with no respect to how one has a trajectory in a career and doing the things you're expected to do, I get a call from a friend I had known in New York, who I met through one of my friends that I'd literally been friends with since fifth grade, and asked if I would consider coming to work at this hip hop magazine in Los Angeles called Rap Pages. And I said yes. And one of the things about me that's probably not good to follow is I have a horrible habit of like being intrigued by what I'm doing and not always asking what it pays. So I moved to Los Angeles, not really realizing that my salary was not as high as I thought it would be. But had I known that, I may not have taken the job. And that would have been a travesty because in Los Angeles, working at this hip hop magazine, I was able to merge all of my different skill sets. I was able to bring my Black historical knowledge together. I was able to bring my love for music. I was able to take over the entertainment section and write about, or at least supervise others. I was an associate editor as well as I did writing about the film and TV industry with an emphasis on Black people. And it was just an amazing experience. In Los Angeles, I became active in things like the Black Hollywood Education Resource Center, where I would meet people. I mean, in New York, I hung out, and so, I was used to seeing celebrities and different people. But in Los Angeles, I really became a part of film communities and going to screenings regularly, going to salons where you were meeting up and coming directors and getting to see material like movies and TV shows, early and speaking to those people. And as I was more passionate about that, people on the outside began to notice and invite me to different things. And so eventually I would go on to write for publications like Essence and Vibe, and just be able to, write about like all kinds of different movies, and to see people who like are now, I guess, bigger names. I remember writing a piece about Jamie Foxx when he was in Any Given Sunday. At the time, he was not the big star that he is today. And I mean, he was known because he had been on In Living Color and he had his own comedy series, but he was not a movie guy and not seen for that. And I just felt that this role that he played, Willie Beeman, was a breakout role for him. And I had somebody who said, okay, let's do that. And so that just started me on a roll of coming into contact with material and content that would go on to make a lasting impact. And I was asked to step away from writing to become a film publicist. And that was an extreme education. So I worked on a little franchise you may have heard of called The Fast and the Furious. I worked on the very first movie, and my job was to outreach to Black audiences. So when you see a film, there's a lot that goes into making the public aware of that film and getting them to go out and support it, preferably in the first weekend or so, or like if it's television, the premiere and so forth. So that experience really just gave me a deeper understanding of how this engine of entertainment worked. But I missed writing and I returned to it. And I was able to work for magazines like Upscale and for a publication called Uptown. And currently I contribute to ebony.com and like The Wrap and some others. In the past, I've written for theGrio and The Root. And again, I do the things that I love. I am a part of the American Film Critics Association and the Black Women Film Network, organizations that help to elevate film and television with an emphasis on inclusion and equity. And so on a regular basis, I'm involved with programming content that not only brings awareness, but also inspires others to take the challenge themselves. Another thing that I do is from time to time, I do write books. And so I am not sure how much you know about the Dummies series, but I have written both African American history for dummies and Black American history for dummies. And for me, having knowledge of my personal history and culture, but also an area that is very central to the country in which I am born and raised and reside, has empowered me to look beyond what is force fed or highlighted, and knowing that there is an audience and a support group, or I shouldn't say support group, but an audience for that information that uplifts and inspires, as well as gives you context from about where you stand in the world today. Fortunately for me, this hyper focus on Black history, Black culture, Black arts has come full circle in the film and television industries. And so now there is just so much content. I am constantly busy covering shows like Queen Sugar, created by Ava DuVernay, who was a one-time publicist, and forged ahead by the great Oprah Winfrey. There are other shows like 50 Cent and his whole Power verse that was created by Courtney Kemp. There are like countless shows around the world. I have edited a volume of books about a classic TV show, The Wire, which premiered 20 years ago, and which I was able to gather other Black writers to look at the show in ways that writers or volumes of books prior to this one did not. It's called Cracking the Wire During Black Lives Matter. And so right now, I am living in a time that nearly 30 years ago, people told me did not exist. People wondered how I would be able to make it, being so focused on Blackness, being so focused on Black culture, Black content. The time in which I came up, it was better to adapt to the mainstream, and that was how you made it. Being into um, being into Black history, Black culture, and being outside of the university system was not considered viable by many. But hip hop in particular showed me that you could speak a certain truth and be received, and that you didn't have to be loved and appreciated by everyone, but you had to stand in what it is that moved you, that was a passion for you, and that you would be okay. And so I don't want to make it seem like being a writer, especially when you're a freelance writer like I am, isn't without its ups and downs. But you have to know what kind of person you are. And if you are like a person who is not into routine, who can wake up any day and roll with what happens and not scared of the unexpected, not worried about instability, then this is for you. And no matter what part of the world that you come from, where you are from matters. And who you come from matters. Giving voice to that. Like, it can be in film and television, but sometimes it's in, the person who started a business or a charity because they saw a greater need. At the end of the day, sharing human experiences and being able to connect the dots is what lets those who come behind us know that we were here, that there were experiences that may not be in the mainstream, but that matter. Like for me as a historian, being able to look at the work that Azorno Hurston did, or to read some of the books that W.B. Du Bois wrote, like The Philadelphia Negro, looking into oral histories, reading old magazine articles, watching old films. It gives me a glimpse of what has come before me, letting me know what we have progressed in and where we need to go further. And that is the power that each of us have in whatever our gift is. So if there is something that I have learned, particularly from interviewing countless people throughout this long career of mine, is that a lot of times the people who love what they do did not know that what they did even existed. I think of coming from a time not just when hip hop wasn't cool, but to think of how ridiculed um, young people, particularly young men, black men, were for caring about sneakers. And then in 2022, in the 21st century, there being a market for sneakers and people appreciating that vintage knowledge and to see this $1 billion industry. It's only shown me that when you are passionate about something, when it's something that you care about, and a lot of times other people outside of you think that you are crazy, it just means that you are the one that is meant to create that path. And it's very important that you have the faith that you can do it and that you will. Oftentimes, we like to go through the brick wall instead of going through the open door because we get caught up in what we should be doing and not what it is we are called to do. And I'm not naive. I know it's not as easy for others. For the most part, have been responsible for myself. And that has been a tremendous luxury. And I do realize that. But also, you have people who have been able to find a way to make what they feel, what they cannot, that like fire, that passion that they cannot like let go of. If it bothers you and only you, guess what? You are called to do that thing. And you have to be very, very like just confident and don't ignore that call. Sometimes we can be like, is it really me, Lord? And we don't believe that we are as capable of these things that are just unreal to us. Like, right now, having people listening to what I have to say, being interested in how I've gotten here. But one of the reasons that I am here because I'm interested in how others have gotten here. And I've wanted to share that with other people. Like speaking to sitting down and speaking to actors and directors, especially those people who look like me, who have come up in an industry that, had it not been for back then a Spike Lee and in more recent years a Tyler Perry, that they did not think welcome them, or people who stumbled into acting classes and become great actors just by happenstance. Today, what is so wonderful is that there is more intention, there are more resources than before. If I spoke to, I just interviewed Tim's, and listening to her story of, having this feeling inside of her and wanting to express that and being encouraged in her music by others, and having this feeling that she did not find in what was out there, and going to YouTube University and learning how to produce her own music, to get this gift that was inside of her to the rest of us. And then using that platform that she has been given to hopefully inspire others that it's possible. And thank you, the message from the UK about enjoying listening to me. It's a little hard because, you do feel like you're rambling. But I hope that if there's anything that I can give you today, is to not ignore that you do so naturally, to know that it is valuable, even if you, even if it is something like, there are people who are obsessive about flowers, or who, I met a guy who was just obsessed with how the tamale got to Mississippi. And, that became a whole food movement. I've met people who, just saw things differently, and at first did things that, say, was just a hobby for them. They didn't think anything of it. But then other people were like, hey, that's valuable. Actually, I have a story where that happened to me. So even though I was going to these different events, and, I was published at an early age when I was in grade school, and I won oration contest, and, I'd been told you could be a writer. My very first published piece that I was paid for came from going to this Black male exhibit and just speaking out, having a conversation with someone that I did not know owned a publication. And he said to me, hey, I will pay you to write those things down. And so it kind of put in my head that, okay, you can make money doing this. And though I wasn't, before I'd done it a lot as a hobby, but again, I was still going to grad school. I didn't think of writing as something that could be what I did full time, until one day, being willing to write about things like, doing book reviews. That was not the sexy thing. What I do now, talking to music artists and producers and other people who move the world, that's the sexy part. But the time, like reading a book and doing a review, that was not what most people wanted to do. And that world opened up all kinds of things for me because I could handle that. I was given more opportunities. And also, I created a lot of opportunities for myself. Like, constantly going out, being surrounded by people who are as passionate about the things that I am, being in a network, learning about what's coming down the pipeline, being proactive about the things that excite me, reaching out to various publications, recognizing what it is they need. Like I was given the opportunity to interview Falake, who stars in Bob Hart's Abishola. And I was moved by her story of growing up in Nigeria and being on this television show, which for those out looking from the outside looking in was a bit controversial. But I reached out to OK Africa knowing that, they had this voice on the continent and, and within the diaspora and did not often do film and TV. And because of how I presented her story, I was able to get them to take a chance and to show her journey. So those are the types of things that move me. And if it moves you, do not be afraid to let your destiny find you. Do not be afraid to go after what it is you feel in your heart, the thing that you cannot let go. And even if you don't end up doing what you think you would do, trust and believe that what God has for you is greater than anything that you can design. So I think that is my time. If there are questions, feel free. I don't really know how that works, but I am happy to answer it. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, thank you so much for listening to me. Congratulations, Lapong Ferguson, for putting this together. This is just and like I'm just so like awed, like who puts together their own like international conference and with the idea of service to others. And that's another thing. If whatever it is you're moved to do serves, uplifts, and motivates others, you will never fail in this. It is not even possible. So, again, thank you. And, you know, don't be afraid to be greater than you could ever imagine.